The wind had a way of cutting right through the siding of the old farmhouse, the kind of cold that didn't just sit on your skin but settled deep into your marrow and refused to leave. For most people in the valley, the solution was simple. You turned up the thermostat, you called the propane truck, you wrote the check, gritted your teeth, and watched your bank account drain alongside the falling mercury. But Marcus Henderson was not most people, and the structure rising against the south-facing wall of his workshop was proof of that. To the untrained eye, it looked like madness. To the neighbors, specifically the ones who drove by slowly in their pristine pickups, it looked like garbage. Because it was garbage, or at least it used to be. It was a grid of aluminum beverage cans, thousands of them, stacked in columns and painted a matte black that seemed to swallow the sunlight whole. Marcus stood back, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days, and looked at the array. It was ugly in the way that only unfinished prototypes can be ugly. It was raw. It was industrial. And to the community of Cedar Ridge, it was the final nail in the coffin of Marcus's reputation. He could hear the engine of a truck idling on the road behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know it was Bill Miller. Bill had been farming corn and soy in the valley for 40 years and had a strict definition of what a farm should look like. A farm should be orderly. It should be painted white or red. It should not look like a recycling center exploded against the side of a barn. "You building a monument to alcoholism there, Marcus," Bill shouted from the cab of his truck. The voice carried easily over the frost-hardened ground. Marcus didn't flinch. He just kept wiping his hands, his eyes tracing the seal on the polycarbonate sheeting. It wasn't the first time he'd heard it. For the last 3 months, ever since he started scavenging the cans from the local recycling depot, the jokes had been relentless. They called him the Aluminum King. They called him the Trash Man. They whispered at the diner that the Henderson boy had finally cracked under the pressure of the rising interest rates and the bad harvest. "I'm building a furnace, Bill," Marcus said, his voice low, almost to himself. He knew Bill wouldn't understand. Not yet. "A furnace made of beer cans," Bill laughed, a harsh, grating sound that mixed with the caw of a crow in the distance. "You gonna burn the cans. That aluminum's gonna melt before you get a degree of heat out of it. You're wasting your time, son. You're wasting your land. It's an eyesore. My property value is dropping just looking at it." "It works on convection," Marcus said, turning finally to face the road. The sun was low, casting long shadows that stretched from the monstrosity across the gravel driveway. "It captures the solar radiation. The air heats up inside the columns. Heat rises, it pumps into the house. Free heat, Bill. Free heat," Bill repeated, shaking his head as he put the truck into gear. "Nothing in this world is free, Marcus. You pay for it one way or another. You're paying for it with your dignity right now. You let me know when you freeze to death this winter. I'll come thaw you out with my diesel heater." The truck rolled away, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled on the black paint of the cans. Marcus watched him go. He felt a tightening in his chest, the familiar weight of isolation. It would have been easy to stop. It would have been easy to tear it all down, crush the cans, send them back to the recycling plant, and take out another loan to pay for the oil delivery. That's what a normal person would do. A normal person would care about the whispers in town. A normal person wouldn't spend their evenings drilling holes into the bottoms of soda cans while the rest of the world watched television. But Marcus was driven by a math that Bill Miller couldn't see. He had sat at his kitchen table 6 months ago, staring at the stack of bills that seemed to grow taller every month. The cost of energy was up 30%. His income was down 10%. The gap between those two numbers was where he lived, and that gap was closing fast. He realized then that the system wasn't designed for him to win. It was designed for him to pay. Every month, he was renting his survival from a utility company that didn't know his name. He was buying his warmth from a fluctuating global market that didn't care if he froze. He needed an exit. He didn't want a partial solution. He didn't want a 5% discount. He wanted out. He wanted to sever the umbilical cord that tied his comfort to their profits. And the answer he found wasn't in high-tech lithium batteries or expensive geothermal pumps that cost more than his truck. The answer was in the trash. It was in the specific thermal conductivity of aluminum, a metal that transferred heat with incredible efficiency, and in the basic laws of thermodynamics. The preparation had been meticulous, almost obsessive. It wasn't just grabbing cans and gluing them together. He had spent weeks in the library, accessing old engineering forums on the public computer, printing out schematics from the 1970s back to the land movement. He learned that the air needed turbulence to heat up effectively. If the air just shot straight up a smooth pipe, the center of the air column would stay cool while only the edges heated up. He needed to break the airflow. He needed to make the air tumble and mix against the hot metal. That was the genius of the can. The shape of the top and bottom of a standard aluminum can, when stacked, created a natural baffle. It forced the air to swirl, but it required modification. He had to build a jig in his workshop, a wooden cradle that would hold the can steady while he used a hole saw to cut out the bottom and a finning tool to slit the top. The first month of the build was the hardest, not because of the labor, but because of the sheer volume of material required. He needed 240 columns. Each column was 16 cans high. That was nearly 4,000 cans. He couldn't drink that much soda in a lifetime, so he became a scavenger. He went to the local dive bars on Sunday mornings, asking for their empties. The smell of stale beer and sticky sugar became his perfume. He went to the town dump, diving into the sorting bins, while the attendants watched him with a mix of pity and suspicion. Hey Marcus, one of the attendants, a guy named Larry who he'd gone to high school with, had called out one afternoon. "You hit hard times, man. I can spot you at 20 if you need gas." Marcus had looked up from the bin, holding a black garbage bag full of Mountain Dew cans. "I'm good, Larry. I'm actually doing an experiment." An experiment, Larry had said, skepticism dripping from his voice, right? Well, just don't cut yourself, and maybe wash up before you go into town. You smell like a brewery floor. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that rose up his neck. But he took the cans, he took every single one. He brought them home, washed them in a mild acid bath to strip the paint and the sugar, and stacked them in the barn. The sound of the aluminum clinking together became the soundtrack of his life. Clink, 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 the sound of pennies being saved. The sound of independence. When the construction finally began, the skepticism of the neighbors turned into active mockery. He was building the frame on the south wall of the workshop first as a test run before committing to the main house. The frame was built from 2x4s, insulated with rigid foam board he'd salvaged from a demolition site in the next county. He sealed every gap with high-temperature silicone. Air leaks were the enemy. If cold air could get in, the efficiency would plummet. He needed a sealed ecosystem, a vacuum of heat. He remembered the day he started gluing the cans. He used a high-heat automotive adhesive, the kind meant for engine blocks. He had to work fast, apply the glue, stack the can, press it down, check the plumb line. If a column leaned even a fraction of an inch, the whole array would buckle under its own weight. He worked 12 hours a day, his back aching, his fingers stained black from the paint he applied to the finished columns. The paint was crucial. It wasn't just any black paint. He had researched selective coatings, chemicals that absorbed sunlight but didn't radiate the heat back out. Those were too expensive, so he made his own blend. He used a matte high heat barbecue paint mixed with a fine graphite powder. It created a surface that was visually void, a black hole for solar energy. When the sun hit it, you could feel the heat radiating off it from 3 feet away, even before the glass was on. But the neighbors didn't see the thermal dynamics. They saw a man gluing trash to his wall. The gossip mill in Cedar Ridge was more efficient than any solar panel. By the time he was halfway done, the rumors had mutated. Some said he was building a bomb shelter. Others said he had lost his mind and was trying to communicate with aliens. Mrs. Higgins, the church organist who lived 2 miles down the road, stopped by one afternoon with a casserole. It was a gesture of charity. the kind you give to a widower or someone who has just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. "Marcus, dear," she said, standing on his porch, eyeing the black wall of cans warily. "We've been praying for you." Marcus wiped his hands on his jeans. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins, that's very kind. We were wondering," she continued, clutching her purse, "if you needed help, maybe with organizing things. My nephew is a contractor. He could help you take down ... whatever that is. Before the county gets involved, you know there are zoning laws, Marcus. You can't just pile refuse on your building. It attracts rats." "It's not refuse, Mrs. Higgins," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's a solar air heater. It's going to heat this shop and eventually the house. Without propane, without electricity." She smiled at him, a sad, condescending smile. "Oh, Marcus, solar panels are those shiny blue glass things. My cousin has them in Arizona. They cost $20,000. You can't make them out of soda cans. It's just ... it's not dignified. Your father, God rest his soul, he kept this place so neat. He wouldn't want to see it like this." That stung. His father had been a man of convention. He did things the way they had always been done. And he had died with a second mortgage and a heart worn out from worrying about rain. Marcus took the casserole. "I appreciate the food, Mrs. Higgins, but I know what I'm doing. Just wait. Give me a month. I hope you're right, dear," she said, turning away. "For your sake, but I think you're just making a mess." The doubt was infectious. There were nights lying in bed, listening to the wind howl, when Marcus questioned himself. What if the airflow was too restricted? What if the adhesive failed after a year of thermal expansion and contraction? What if Bill Miller was right and he was just a crazy man building a monument to his own stubbornness? He had invested his last savings into the polycarbonate glazing twin wall sheets that were expensive but necessary to trap the heat. If this failed, he wouldn't just be the laughing stock, he would be broke. But then morning would come and the sun would hit the unfinished array, and he would put his hand near the bottom intake vents he had cut into the wall. Even without the glass, even in the raw morning air, he could feel a faint draft. The air wanted to move, the physics were real. He just had to trust them. He finished the array in late October. The timing was critical. The first hard frosts were settling in. The landscape had turned from the vibrant orange of autumn to the dull grays and browns of impending winter. The array stood complete, a dark, glossy monolith against the weathered wood of the barn. It was 12 feet wide and 8 feet tall. It was covered in the twin wall polycarbonate, framed in aluminum trim he had bent himself. It looked sleek, surprisingly professional now that the ragged edges of the cans were hidden. But to the town, it was still the Birken Wall. The real test came on a Tuesday morning in November. The ambient temperature was 32 degrees Fahrenheit. A biting wind was coming out of the north. The sky was that piercing, brilliant blue that offers no warmth, only light. Marcus woke up early. He hadn't turned the shop stove on. He wanted a clean test. He walked out to the shop, his breath pluming in the air. Inside, it was freezing, matching the outdoor temperature. He checked the digital thermometer he had installed in the outlet duct, the hole in the wall where the air from the top of the can array was pushed into the room. At 8 a.m., the sun crested the ridge and hit the panel. At 8:15 a.m., the thermometer read 40 degrees. At 8:30 a.m., it read 60. Marcus stood there, holding his coffee cup, watching the numbers climb. He wasn't using a fan yet. This was pure passive convection. The hot air was rising through the cans, creating a vacuum at the bottom that pulled cool air in from the shop floor. It was a loop, a silent, invisible engine. By 9:30 a.m., the air coming out of the register was 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Marcus dropped his coffee cup. He stared at the readout, 110 degrees. He held his hand up to the vent. It felt like a hairdryer. A steady, robust stream of hot, dry air was pouring into the room, and he wasn't paying a cent for it. The gas meter wasn't spinning. The electric meter wasn't spinning. The sun was hitting trash, and the trash was making heat. He grabbed a folding chair and sat directly in front of the vent, letting the heat wash over him. It smelled faintly of curing paint and warm metal, a scent that to him smelled like victory. He laughed. He sat alone in his workshop and laughed until tears ran down his face. But the validation of a thermometer was one thing. The validation of the community was another, and that wouldn't come from a single morning of success. The neighbors saw the glass going up and assumed he was just protecting his garbage pile. They didn't know about the heat, and Marcus didn't tell them. He didn't invite them over for a demo. He let them talk. He let them mock. He focused on the next phase. If it worked for air, it could work for water. The winter of that year was mild, a stroke of luck that allowed Marcus to expand the system. He wasn't content with just heating the air. He needed hot water. Water heating was the second biggest expense on the farm after space heating. He began designing the second version, the hydronic loop. This was more dangerous. If a water pipe burst, it would ruin the house. If the water froze in the collector at night, the expansion would shatter the copper pipes. He decided to integrate the water system inside the air system. He ran copper piping through the center of the can columns, weaving it back and forth like a snake. The hot air inside the cans would heat the copper, which would heat the water. It was a heat exchanger, but to prevent freezing, he built a drain-back system. When the pump turned off at night, gravity would pull all the water out of the collector and back into a heavily insulated tank in the basement. No water in the panels meant no ice. No ice meant no burst pipes. He spent the winter evenings plumbing. He learned to solder copper, the flux hissing as he applied the torch. He built a control unit using an Arduino board, programming it to sense the temperature difference between the collector and the tank. If the collector was hotter than the water, the pump turned on. If it wasn't, it stayed off. Automation. He was building a robot to manage his heating. By spring, the neighbors had moved on to other gossip. The Henderson place was still the weird farm with the black walls, but since nothing had exploded, it was old news. Bill Miller waved when he drove by, but it was a dismissive wave, a gesture given to the village idiot. Then came the summer, and with it, the need to store the heat. Marcus realized that in July, he would have too much energy. He built a heat dump radiator system in the drying shed to dry his firewood and garlic. He was using the summer sun to prepare for the winter cold. The efficiency loop was closing. He was becoming an island. But the real turning point, the moment that would cleave time into before and after, didn't happen until the 8th winter. For 7 years, Marcus refined his system. He added more panels. He insulated his house to passive house standards. He stopped buying propane entirely. He disconnected the service. The truck driver who came to collect the tank had looked at the solar wall and scratched his head. "You realize if we take this tank, you got no backup," the driver had said. "You get a blizzard, you're gonna freeze." "Take it," Marcus had said. He was all in. The 8th winter was the one the almanacs had warned about, the polar vortex. A massive destabilized Arctic air that broke loose from the pole and descended upon the Midwest like a hammer. The meteorologists were using words like historic and life-threatening. They predicted temperatures of 30 below zero, with wind chills hitting 50 or 60 below. It was the kind of cold that snaps trees and freezes cattle where they stand. The warning came 3 days in advance. The town of Cedar Ridge went into a panic. The grocery store shelves were stripped bare. The propane trucks were running 24 hours a day, but they couldn't keep up with the demand. Prices skyrocketed. People were topping off their tanks, buying electric space heaters, hoarding wood. Marcus went to the store to buy coffee and powdered milk. The mood was grim. He saw Bill Miller in the aisle, looking pale. "You ready for this, Marcus?" Bill asked. There was no mockery in his voice this time. Only fear. "They say the grid might go down. Too much demand. If the power goes, the furnace blowers won't work. Even if you have gas, you can't circulate the heat." "I'm ready," Marcus said. "You got a generator?" Bill asked. "Don't need one," Marcus replied. Bill shook his head. "You're a stubborn fool. You know that. You're gonna die in that house. You come over to my place if it gets too bad." We got a whole house generator. We'll keep you alive." Marcus looked at Bill, seeing the genuine concern beneath the years of ridicule. "Thanks, Bill. But I think I'll be okay." The storm hit on a Thursday evening. It didn't start with snow, it started with the wind. A howling, shrieking gale that shook the foundations of the house, then the temperature plummeted. It dropped 20 degrees in 2 hours. By midnight, it was 10 below. By morning, it was 25 below. And then, just as Bill had predicted, the grid failed. The line snapped somewhere up county, weighed down by ice and whipped by the wind. The lights in the valley flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerators, the whir of the furnace fans, the glow of the televisions, everything went silent. The silence was heavier than the snow. Marcus was in his kitchen when the power went out. He didn't panic. He walked to the basement. His system was powered by a small bank of marine batteries charged by 2 photovoltaic panels he had added the year before, just enough to run the small circulation pumps. The thermal mass in his floor concrete he had poured and insulated was already charged with heat from the previous day's sun. He looked at his system monitor. Tank temperature, 160 degrees. House temperature, 72 degrees. Outside, the world was ending. Inside, Marcus Henderson was making tea. He spent the first day of the blackout reading a book. The wind battered the polycarbonate glazing on the south wall, but the panels held. They were flexible, resilient. And even though the outside air was -30, the sun was shining. The physics didn't change because of the cold. The sun was still hot. The vacuum inside the can still worked. The temperature coming out of his vents was actually hotter than usual because the temperature differential was so extreme. The air was roaring into the house at 130 degrees. He had to crack a window to keep from sweating. On the second day, he saw the figure walking up his driveway. It was a slow, trudging walk. The person was bundled in so many layers they looked like a sphere. They were fighting the wind, head down. Marcus put down his book and went to the door. He opened it, and a blast of Arctic air tried to force its way in, but the positive pressure of the warm house pushed back. The figure stumbled onto the porch. It was Bill Miller. Bill looked up, his face gray, his eyebrows frosted with ice. He was shivering so violently he couldn't speak. Marcus grabbed him by the coat and pulled him inside. Slamming the door against the wind, Bill fell to his knees on the entryway rug. He gasped, the air rasping in his throat. He looked up, his eyes wide, confused. He started stripping off his gloves, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "It's single quotes as ... it's hot," Bill stammered. "Take your coat off, Bill," Marcus said gently. "Come sit by the vent." Bill shed his heavy Carhartt jacket. He stood up, swaying slightly, and walked into the living room. He stopped. He looked around. There was no fire in the fireplace. There was no roar of a generator outside. There was just the quiet hum of a tiny 12-volt pump and the sound of air moving. "How?" Bill whispered. "My house is. It's 30 degrees inside." The generator line froze. The diesel gelled up. We ... we have nothing. The wife is under 3 quilts and she's still crying. I walked ... I had to walk. I thought I'd find you frozen solid. Marcus went to the kitchen and poured a cup of hot water from the tap water heated by the sun yesterday. He handed it to Bill. "It's the cans, Bill," Marcus said. "It's just the cans." Bill took the cup. He wrapped his frozen hands around the ceramic. He looked at the steam rising from the water. He looked at the thermostat on the wall that read 74 degrees. He looked at Marcus, and for the first time in 8 years, he really looked at him. He didn't see the trash man. He didn't see the eccentric failure. He saw a man who had outsmarted the winter. Can ... Can Sarah come? Bill asked, his voice breaking. "And the kids, can I bring them?" "Bring them," Marcus said. "Bring everyone who can walk." That night, the Henderson farmhouse became the lifeboat of Cedar Ridge. It wasn't just the Millers, it was the Johnsons from down the creek. It was Mrs. Higgins. They arrived in waves, driven out of their freezing modern homes by the primitive cold. They walked or drove tractors that could handle the drifts. They piled into Marcus's living room, stripping off layers, stunned by the wall of heat that hit them. There were 12 people sleeping on the floor of Marcus's living room that night. The storm raged outside, burying the fences, freezing the engines of the cars left on the road, but inside, it was a tropical island. Marcus sat in his armchair in the corner. Watching them, he saw Mrs. Higgins holding a mug of tea, staring at the black wall of the addition that she had once called an eyesore. She reached out and touched the drywall, feeling the heat radiating from the ducts behind it. "It's warm," she whispered, as if it were a miracle. "It's not a miracle," Marcus said softly. "It's engineering." The next morning, the sun came out again. The crisis wasn't over. The power would be out for another week, but the panic had broken. They had a safe harbor. And the source of that safety was the very thing they had mocked. Bill Miller approached Marcus while he was checking the pump controller. Bill looked different, humble, stripped of his arrogance. "Marcus," Bill said, "show me." "Show you what?" "Show me how you did it," Bill said. "Show me the cans, show me the math. I've got a barn full of empty pesticide containers. I've got scrap metal. I've got a south wall that does nothing but hold up paint. Teach me." And that was the moment the tide turned. It wasn't the heat that changed them, it was the humility. The realization that their conventional wisdom had failed them, and the outlier, the risk-taker, the junk man had held the key all along. The weeks that followed the Great Freeze were a blur of activity, but of a different kind. The power came back on, but the mindset of Cedar Ridge had shifted permanently. The fear of the cold had settled deep in their bones. They realized how fragile their tether to the grid really was. They looked at their propane bills, which had doubled due to the shortage, and then they looked at Marcus, who hadn't paid a dime. Marcus didn't hoard the knowledge, he didn't patent the design. He didn't charge for consultations, he remembered the philosophy that had started it all. The system is designed to make you pay, so the only way to win is to stop playing their game. If he helped his neighbors stop playing, the whole community became stronger. He held a workshop in his barn 3 weeks later. He expected maybe Bill and a few others. But when he opened the sliding doors, there were 30 people standing in the driveway. People from 3 towns over. People who had heard the story of the hothouse in the freeze. He stood on a crate in front of a pile of Mountain Dew and Budweiser cans. He held up a single empty can. "This," Marcus told the crowd, "is not trash. This is a battery. This is a heat exchanger. This is freedom. But you have to build it. You have to be willing to look foolish. You have to be willing to do the work that others won't." He taught them the importance of the cleaning acid. He showed them how to build the jig to drill the holes perfectly centered. He explained the difference between series and parallel airflow. He showed them the mistake he made in year 3 when he didn't account for thermal expansion and the panel buckled, popping the glass out. He shared his failures so they wouldn't have to repeat them. That spring, the landscape of Cedar Ridge began to change. It wasn't sudden, but it was steady. You'd be driving down County Road 9 and you'd see a glint of black glass on the side of a garage. You'd see a stack of cans drying in a driveway. The aesthetic of the valley shifted from purely traditional to something eclectic, something resourceful. Bill Miller was the first to finish his system. He went bigger than Marcus. He built an entire solar shed to heat his tractor repair shop. He used Tullercan's energy drink cans, claiming they had better surface area. He and Marcus spent hours debating the turbulence coefficients of different can diameters. The man who had once mocked the beer can wall was now arguing about boundary layer thermodynamics. The innovation didn't stop at copying, it evolved. One of the younger farmers, a girl named Sarah who had studied engineering for a year before coming back to the farm, figured out a way to use the system to dehydrate crops more efficiently. She built a massive horizontal array that funneled air into a hopper for drying hops. Another neighbor adapted the system to heat the floor of his chicken coop, keeping egg production up through the darkest months of winter without using heat lamps. Marcus's garbage had become the seed for a localized agricultural revolution. 8 years later, the original panels were still on Marcus's wall. The paint had faded slightly, requiring a touch-up now and then, and he had replaced a few polycarbonate sheets that had been damaged by hail. But the water in his tank was still 160 degrees. He was older now. His joints ached a bit more when the pressure dropped. But he stood on his porch with a different kind of pride. He wasn't the crazy hermit anymore. He was the elder. He was the pioneer. He watched the steam rising from his outdoor shower, another addition, fed directly by the summer excess heat. He took a shower in the open air, the hot water cascading over him, looking out over the valley. He could see the roofs of his neighbors. He could see the black rectangles on 5, 6, 7 different barns. He realized that the legacy wasn't the heat. The heat was just energy. The legacy was the mindset. He had proven that you could look at the refuse of the world, the things society cast aside, the things deemed worthless, and find value. He had proven that you didn't need a corporation to provide for your basic needs. You needed physics, patience, and a willingness to be misunderstood. The aluminum can is a marvel of modern manufacturing. It is precision engineered, lightweight, corrosion resistant, and infinitely recyclable. To throw it away is a crime against geometry. To use it to capture the sun is an act of redemption. Marcus turned off the water. The pipes rattled a familiar, comforting sound. He dried off in the cool evening air, still radiating the warmth of the day's sun. He walked inside, past the thermostat that he hadn't touched in nearly a decade. He sat at his desk and opened his journal. He had been documenting the BTU output for 8 years. The data was a flat line of consistency, free energy. But there was one final entry he wanted to make. It wasn't a number. It was a thought that had been gestating since the night of the storm. Innovation is not about the new. He wrote, it is about the reseeing of the old. We are surrounded by solutions that we are too arrogant to see because they don't look like solutions. They look like work. They look like trash. They look like mistakes. But if you look long enough, and if you are cold enough, you will see the potential energy in everything. He put the pen down. He could hear the wind picking up outside, the start of another winter. Let it blow. The cans were ready. The house was ready. And now, finally, the neighbors were ready too. He turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, but the house remained warm. It held the memory of the sun long after the star had set. And that, Marcus thought as he climbed the stairs to bed, was the only wealth that really mattered. The timeline of innovation is rarely a straight line. It is a jagged scar of trial and error, a seismograph of hope and despair. While the concept of the aluminum thermal collector was simple, sun hits black metal, air gets hot, air rises, the execution was a war of attrition against the laws of physics and the limitations of a budget that hovered near zero. The first winter after the initial idea was not a victory lap, it was a season of humiliating education. Marcus had the theory, but he didn't have the technique. He began the construction of the Phase 1 array in the dead of January, a decision that any seasoned builder would have called masochistic. The workshop was an ice box. To glue the cans, he needed the ambient temperature to be at least 50 degrees for the automotive adhesive to cure properly. This meant he had to build a heated enclosure inside his unheated workshop just to build the heater that would eventually heat the workshop. He constructed a tent out of clear plastic painter's drop cloths and ran a dangerous kerosene space heater inside it, sitting there for hours and the fumes, gluing cans one by one. The process was maddeningly repetitive. Step 1. Take a can. Step 2. Place it in the wooden jig. Step 3. Use the drill press with a 2-inch hole saw to remove the bottom. The sound of the saw tearing through the thin aluminum was a high-pitched shriek that rang in his ears long after the machine was off. Step 4. Use the finning tool, a modified pair of tin snips to cut the top tab and create the turbulence baffles. Step 5. Wash the can in acetone to remove the factory coating. Step 6. Apply a bead of high-temp silicone RTV sealant. Step 7. Press. Step 8. Repeat. He had to do this 3,840 times. His hands became a map of small cuts and chemical burns. The acetone dried his skin until it cracked and bled. The repetitive motion gave him tendinitis in his right elbow. He would wake up at night, his arm throbbing, and question his sanity. Why not just cut firewood? Why not just get a second job at the feed store? Because, he reminded himself in the dark, a job pays you once for your time. A system pays you forever. He was building an asset, not just burning calories. But the community saw none of this internal logic. They only saw the external eccentricity. The skepticism he faced wasn't just passive, it became structural. When he went to the hardware store to buy the polycarbonate sheeting the twin wall glazing that was the most expensive component, the owner, a man named Frank, who had known Marcus since he was a boy, hesitated at the register. "Marcus," Frank said, his hand resting on the credit card machine. "I gotta ask, you sure about this? This stuff is for dollars a square foot. You're putting this over ... beer cans." "That's right," Marcus said, his jaw set. "Look," Frank lowered his voice, leaning over the counter. "I know things are tight. If you need a payment plan for a standard propane furnace, we can work something out. You don't have to resort to ... this. It's not going to passcode, you know. The inspector comes out there, he's going to red tag your whole barn. It's a detached agricultural structure." Marcus recited the zoning code he had memorized, under 200 square feet. "No permanent foundation, it doesn't need a permit. Frank, just run the card." Frank ran the card, but the look in his eyes was one of pity. That pity was heavier than the mockery. Mockery you could fight. Pity just eroded you. The technical failures began in February. Marcus finally mounted the first full-sized panel on the south wall. He sealed it, ducted it into the shop, and waited for the sun. The temperature spiked just like in his small tests. The air poured in at 100 degrees. He felt a surge of triumph, but 2 days later, he walked into the shop and smelled something sweet and chemical. He looked at the window of the collector. It was fogged up. Condensation. He hadn't accounted for the moisture content of the air in the shop. The system was an open loop taking air from the shop, heating it, and returning it. But the shop air had humidity. When that warm, moist air hit the cold glazing at night, it condensed. The water pooled at the bottom of the collector, and because he had used a cheap particle board for the bottom frame, the wood soaked up the water and swelled. The frame warped, the seal broke. It was a disaster. He had to tear the whole thing down. 3 weeks of work ruined by a teaspoon of water physics. He stood in the snow, looking at the warped frame, the cans peeling away where the glue had failed due to the moisture. He could have quit then. He could have taken a sledgehammer to the whole pile and called Bill Miller for that propane delivery. The thought seduced him. It would be so easy to be normal, but he didn't. Instead, he went back to the library. He researched desiccants and vapor barriers. He learned about closed-loop systems versus open-loop. He realized he needed a dedicated intake manifold with a filter to trap moisture and weep holes at the bottom of the collector to allow condensation to drain. He needed to rebuild the frame using pressure-treated lumber and wrap it in aluminum flashing. He started over. The second build took him through the spring and into the summer. This time, he didn't just build a heater, he built a machine. He installed a thermal snap switch, a small bimetallic disc that would only turn on the fan when the collector reached 110 degrees and shut it off when it dropped below 90. This prevented the reverse siphon effect where the collector would actually pull heat out of the house at night. He added a summer bypass vent, a manual damper that allowed him to exhaust the heat outside during July and August so the collector wouldn't melt its own internal components. By the time autumn arrived, he had a version 2.0 that was sleek, sealed, and automated, but the isolation had deepened. He had stopped going to the diner, he stopped going to church. He felt like a ghost in his own town, a man who spoke a language of BTS and airflow that no one else wanted to hear. Then came the year of the wet harvest. It was an agricultural nightmare. September and October brought relentless, cold rains. The corn in the valley was molding on the stalk. The hay that had been cut couldn't dry. Farmers were losing tens of thousands of dollars. Propane prices spiked as everyone tried to run their grain dryers 24/7. The hum of industrial dryers was a constant drone across the valley, the sound of money burning. Marcus didn't grow corn, but he grew garlic and specialty herbs, and he had a small wood drying operation. He needed to dry his product, but he couldn't afford the gas. The sun was hidden behind clouds for weeks. This was the crisis that forced the next evolution. Marcus looked at his solar collector. It was useless without the sun. It sat there, a black monolith, cold and dormant. He realized the fatal flaw of solar: intermittency. You cannot rely on a source that disappears for half the day and half the year. He needed a battery. Not an electric one, but a thermal one. He began to dig. He dug a pit in the floor of his barn, 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide. He lined it with high-density rigid foam, 4 inches thick. He filled the pit with rocks, river stones he collected from the creek bed, thousands of pounds of them. Rock has a high thermal mass. It holds heat. He rerouted the ducting from his solar collector. Instead of blowing the hot air directly into the room, he blew it through the rock bed. On the sunny days, even the few hours of sun they got, the collector would roar to life, pumping 140-degree air into the rocks. The rocks would absorb the heat. The air coming out the other side would be cooler, having deposited its energy into the stones. Then, at night or on cloudy days, he would reverse the flow. He would pull air through the warm rocks. The stones would release their heat, warming the air, which would then heat the barn. It was a primitive battery, a caveman battery, but it worked. He monitored the rock bed temperature obsessively. He watched it climb. 80 degrees, 90 degrees, 100 degrees. The pile of rocks became a thermal engine. While his neighbors were burning hundreds of dollars of propane to run their dryers, Marcus was using the stored heat of last week's sun to dry his herbs. One afternoon, Bill Miller stopped by. He was looking for a chain hoist to borrow, but really, he was looking for confirmation that Marcus was failing. Bill looked tired. The wet harvest was killing him. "Smells dry in here," Bill remarked, stepping into the barn. He sniffed the air. "Smells like ... summer dust." "Active thermal mass storage," Marcus said, pointing to the floor. "I'm pulling heat from the rocks." Bill looked at the floor, then at the solar wall. "It's raining, Marcus. There's no sun." "I harvested the sun 3 days ago," Marcus said. "I stored it," Bill laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "You canned the sunlight." "Sure. Listen, can I get that hoist?" "My dryer fan blew a bearing." "Take it," Marcus said. Bill took the hoist, but he lingered at the door. "You know, people are talking about the county assessing your place. They say this ... structure ... might affect the values. You might want to think about taking it down before the snow flies. It looks like a junkyard, Marcus." "No offense, none taken," Marcus lied. The snow did fly, and it kept flying. The winter that followed the wet harvest was brutal, but it was nothing compared to the great freeze that was coming years later. This was just a standard, grinding Midwestern winter. But it was the winter that proved the concept of the passive house retrofit Marcus had begun. He realized that making heat was only half the equation, keeping it was the other half. A house is like a bucket. If it has holes, it doesn't matter how much water you pour in. Marcus's farmhouse, built in 1920, was a sieve. He couldn't afford new fiberglass insulation. So he turned to the fields. He began using straw bales. He stacked straw bales around the foundation of the house, wrapping them in black plastic to keep them dry. He went into the attic and packed it with cellulose shredded newspaper he got for free from the recycling center. He treated the paper with boric acid, a cheap powder from the hardware store, to make it fireproof and insect-resistant. He was insulating his house with trash, just like he heated it with trash. The turning point of his internal narrative, the moment he stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like a scientist, happened on a Tuesday night in January. The power went out for 6 hours. Not a major disaster, just a standard rural outage. Marcus sat in his living room. He had the solar thermal system dumping heat into the rock bed all day. The active vents were off because the power was out, but the passive radiation from the rock mass under the floor he had extended the system was radiating up. He lit a candle. He looked at the thermometer. 68 degrees. He looked out the window. He could see the lights of Bill Miller's house down the valley were out. He knew Bill had a generator, but he hadn't turned it on yet. Bill was probably scrambling in the dark, finding flashlights, cursing the electric co-op. Marcus didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to flip a switch. He didn't have to buy fuel. The system just was. It was a steady state of equilibrium. He realized then that true wealth wasn't the number in the bank account. It was the absence of dependency. He was the wealthiest man in the county, measured in BTS. But the real test, the crisis that would define the legend of the Kinwall, began with a subtle shift in the jet stream 3 years later. It wasn't a sudden storm. It was a relentless, creeping freeze that defied historical averages. The meteorologists called it a blocking pattern. High pressure sat over Greenland, forcing the polar vortex to spill southward and park over the American Midwest. It began with the temperature dropping to 0 and staying there for a week. Then it dropped to 10 below, then 20 below. The infrastructure of Cedar Ridge was built for cold, but not this cold and not for this long. Diesel fuel begins to gel at around 15 degrees Fahrenheit if not treated. At -20, even treated fuel struggles. The school buses stopped running. The delivery trucks stopped running. Then the propane shortage hit. It was a perfect storm of logistics failure. The trains bringing propane from the refineries were frozen on the tracks. The trucks couldn't navigate the ice-covered highways. The local suppliers began rationing. Emergency fill-ups only, the sign at the depot said, 100-gallon limit. For a farmhouse with zero insulation, 100 gallons lasts maybe 10 days in that cold. Marcus watched the crisis unfold from his window. He saw the smoke rising from chimneys. People were burning their furniture, their fences. He saw the desperation in the way cars moved on the road, skidding, rushing, panic in the headlights. His system was being pushed to the limit. The solar gain was good, the sky was clear, but the night losses were extreme. The delta T, the difference in temperature between inside and outside, was nearly 100 degrees. He had to engage phase 3 of his system, the compost reactor. He had built this the previous autumn, anticipating a hard winter, though not this hard. It was a biomechanical heater. In the lean-to greenhouse attached to the south side of the barn, he had built a massive mound of wood chips, horse manure, and straw. 10 tons of biomass. Decomposition creates heat. A lot of it. The center of a well-made compost pile can reach 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Marcus had buried a coil of PEX tubing cross-linked polyethylene deep inside the mound. He circulated water through this coil. The water went in at 50 degrees and came out at 130 degrees. He pumped this hot water into the radiant floor of his house. While the town was freezing, Marcus was heating his home with rotting horse manure. The smell in the greenhouse was earthy, rich, and alive. It smelled like a jungle floor. Outside, it was a frozen hellscape of white and gray. Inside, the breakdown of carbon was keeping him alive. The first person to break was not Bill Miller, but the young couple who had bought the old Anderson place miles down the gravel road. Their names were Jenny and Mark. They were city transplants, unprepared, under-equipped. They showed up at Marcus's door at 2 a.m. Their car had died at the end of his driveway. They walked up through the snow, wrapped in blankets, carrying a crying infant. Marcus opened the door. The wind howled like a banshee. Jenny's face was white, her lips blue. The baby wasn't even crying anymore. It was just silent, which was worse. "Please," Mark rasped. "We ran out of gas." The space heaters stopped. "The baby ... get in," Marcus said. He ushered them into the living room. The transition was physical, a wall of warmth that hit them. It wasn't the dry, scorched air of a forced air furnace. It was a gentle, pervasive warmth radiating from the floors, from the walls. Jenny sat on the sofa, clutching the baby. She looked around, dazed. "Do you have a generator running?" "I don't hear anything." No generator, Marcus said. He went to the kitchen and began heating soup on his wood cook stove as backup to the backup. But it's warm, Mark said, stripping off his frozen gloves. It's so warm. How? Solar thermal, Marcus said, bringing them mugs of hot broth. And compost. Mark looked at him like he was insane. Later, Marcus said, drink this, warm the core first. They stayed for 3 days. The roads were impassable. During that time, Marcus didn't lecture them, he didn't preach. He just let them live in the ecosystem he had built. Mark, who was an IT specialist by trade, became fascinated by the Arduino controller Marcus had built for the Kinwall. He sat there for hours, watching the LEDs blink, watching the servos open and close the dampers. This code, Mark said on the second day, pointing to the laptop Marcus used to program the board. It's elegant, but your hysteresis loop is a bit tight. You're cycling the fan too often. If you widen the dead band, you'll save wear on the motor. I picked it up from forums, Marcus admitted. I'm not a coder. I am, Mark said. He sat down and started typing. Let me optimize this for you. It's the least I can do for ... saving our lives. And there, in the middle of a blizzard, a collaboration began, the farmer and the tech worker. The old world and the new. Mark tweaked the algorithms. He optimized the fan speeds. He improved the efficiency of the heat extraction by 15% just by changing the software. It was a microcosm of what the future could be. Not high-tech versus low-tech, but high-tech enabling low-tech. But the crisis wasn't over, the community was breaking down. The sheriff's department was overwhelmed with welfare checks. People were gathering at the high school gymnasium, which had a massive diesel generator, but the fuel was running low there too. Bill Miller's pride finally broke on the 4th day. His generator failed, not the fuel, but the starter motor. It just clicked and died. His house, a sprawling 4,000-square-foot ranch, lost heat immediately. He didn't walk this time. He drove his tractor, the only thing that would start, slowly up the road. He pulled into Marcus's drive. Marcus came out to meet him. It's dead, Bill said, leaning out of the cab. The whole damn system, dead, bring Sarah, Marcus said, I've got room. I can't leave the livestock, Bill said, his voice cracking. The water troughs are frozen solid, the cattle. They're not going to make it, Marcus. This was the true horror of the farmer. Losing the house is one thing, losing the herd is another. Marcus looked at the Kinwall. He looked at the greenhouse. He looked at the compost pile. We can't heat your barn, Marcus said. It's too big, too drafty, but we can heat the water. If we can get them water, they can metabolize their feed. If they eat, they generate their own body heat. But they can't eat if they're dehydrated. How? Bill asked. I have no power to run tank heaters. We make a thermosiphon, Marcus said. We take the portable solar collector I built for the workshop demo. We load it on the sled. We haul it to your barn. We hook it up to the trough. It's 20 below. Marcus, Bill said. You want to build a science project in a blizzard. You want to watch your cows die. Marcus shot back. They did it. It took them 6 hours in the biting wind. They dragged the portable unit, a smaller version of the Kinwall, mounted on skids across the fields. They set it up facing the south horizon. They ran the hoses. They had to use a blowtorch to thaw the connection points on the trough. But when the sun broke through the clouds at noon, the physics took over. The black cans absorbed the light. The water inside the copper pipes heated up. Hot water rises. It flowed up into the trough, pushing the cold water down into the collector. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the ice on the surface of the trough began to melt. A hole appeared. Steam rose. The cattle, sensing the water, crowded around. They drank. Bill Miller stood there, his face wrapped in a scarf, watching his livelihood survive because of a stack of aluminum cans and a man he had called a fool. He put a gloved hand on Marcus's shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The steam rising from the water said it all. That night, the farmhouse was crowded. Mark, Jenny, the baby, Bill, Sarah, and Mrs. Higgins, who had been picked up by Bill on the way back, were all gathered in the living room. The floor was covered in mattresses and sleeping bags. It was a strange, impromptu commune. The social hierarchy of Cedar Ridge had been flattened by the cold. There were no rich farmers or poor eccentrics anymore. There were just people with heat and people without. Marcus sat in the corner listening to the wind batter the house. He felt a deep, resonant exhaustion, but also a profound peace. He looked at the walls of his home. They weren't just walls anymore. They were membranes. They were active participants in his survival. He realized that he hadn't just built a heating system. He had built a lifeboat, and the ocean was rising. "You know," Mark said, breaking the silence. He was holding his sleeping baby. "When the power comes back. If it comes back, I want to build one of these. But I want to automate the dampers with a Raspberry Pi. Maybe link it to a weather API so it can predict the solar gain and pre-charge the rock bed." Bill Miller looked up from his coffee. "I've got that south wall on the machine shed," he grumbled. "It's 60 feet long. How many cans is that?" Marcus did the mental math instantly. "About 20,000. That's a lot of beer," Bill said. A ripple of laughter went through the room. "We can ask the recycling center," Marcus said. "They have bales of them, cubes of crushed cans. Maybe we don't use whole cans. Maybe we use crushed ones in a mesh cage. More turbulence, more surface area. See?" Marcus smiled. "Now you're thinking like an engineer." The storm broke 2 days later. The temperatures rose to a balmy 10 degrees. The power trucks finally made it through. The hum of the grid returned to the valley. The lights flickered on. The furnace fans in the distance roared to life. But the dynamic in the Henderson farmhouse had shifted. The guests didn't leave immediately. They lingered. They helped Marcus clean up the kitchen. They asked questions. When they finally walked out into the bright, cold sunshine, they looked back at the house differently. The black wall of cans wasn't an eyesore anymore. It was a monolith of resilience. It was the only reason they had been warm. The validation was absolute. It wasn't measured in degrees or dollars, but in the survival of the community. Marcus had not only saved himself, he had provided the sanctuary that saved his neighbors. But the story didn't end with the storm. The storm was just the catalyst. The real work, the legacy, was about to begin. Because now, the neighbors didn't just want to survive. They wanted to understand. They wanted to be free. Marcus stood on his porch, watching Bill Miller's tractor disappear down the road. He looked at the pile of spare cans in the corner of the porch. He picked one up. It was light, flimsy, empty. "Not empty," he whispered to the wind. Full of potential, he walked back inside. He had to prepare. He knew they would be back. He needed to draw up plans. He needed to simplify the design. He needed to make it replicable. The hermit phase was over. The teacher phase had begun.